And I didn't realize that this was the first one of the season, so I guess that's both a lot of pressure and no pressure because I don't have anything to live up to. So I want to thank everybody for coming and being interested in this topic. It's of course one of those topics that is absolutely essential to everyone in our field, especially those who run and raise money for organizations that do the great work of the nonprofit sector in our country, and also, really are the hope for those moving the needle on those causes that all of us really care about. And so what we want to talk to you about today is the next generation of folks who are going to be the major donors to your organizations and to really any organizations that are doing work in nonprofits or in other related new kinds of organizations that are trying to create social change and solve the problems that all of us really want to solve. So I'm going to talk to you today about a book that's coming out in just a few weeks and based on some research that we've been doing for many years. And we start with, in some ways, this really dramatic statement that says, these donors, the Gen X and Millennial major donors, and we're really talking here about those who have the capacity to make major gifts, they will be the most significant philanthropists in history. It's a very dramatic statement to make, of course, because we know that there have been plenty of very significant philanthropists in history, but the reason we say this is not necessarily because we think the Gen X and Millennial major donors are more philanthropically minded or that they have a more public spirit than previous generations of donors or even than their parents or grandparents or others who've been involved in giving, often major giving. It's simply for a few reasons, most dramatically of which they're going to have the most resources to give of any generation cohort in history. This is because of the sort of numbers that you all are probably familiar with about the concentration of wealth in our society and the amount of wealth that's available to the 1% or others who are able to be these sorts of major donors. It's really dramatically increased since the 1980s. And then also related to that, of course, the money that's being transferred in the historic wealth transfer that we find ourselves in right now, the latest estimate being $59 trillion being transferred to the Gen X and Millennials, and of that, almost half is designated already to be going to, or estimated to be going to, charitable purposes. So they're going to have significant resources to give. They're also, many of them, as you know from the news and others, are creating their own wealth and significant new wealth, often at earlier ages than previous wealthy folks have been earning their money. So there's a lot of resources to give that makes them significant. They're also going to be significant, though, for a couple other reasons. One is that they want to give throughout their lifetimes, as we'll see. And those who give throughout their lifetimes give more, as makes sense, and as you all know. And so they are going to have, and they're very, very eager, as you'll see, to start giving now and to give significantly throughout their lives. So that makes them significant. And then finally, they're giving at a time when the field itself is changing quite a bit. There's a lot of innovation going on in the vehicles that people use for giving and how they're engaging as donors. It's really a time of historic innovation and experimentation in the field of nonprofit and social sector. And these next generation donors, as we'll see, are very excited about that particular kind of experimentation and innovation. And because of that, they're going to be significant in the change that they're going to make and really the impact they're going to have. So we talk about them, and we're not the only ones to use this phrase of a golden age of giving. But what we make another dramatic statement to say the next generation donors are planning to and will revolutionize philanthropy in this golden age of giving. Revolution is not a word we use lightly, and we'll talk about what we mean by revolution. There are a particular kind of revolutionaries. But we do want to emphasize that there is a big change coming, and they are very eager to make that change. So what we're going to talk about today is just what that revolution that's on the horizon will look like, and what are the implications for those who run nonprofit organizations and do the good work of fundraising. So what we did, given the significance of this group of people, and the fact that we really didn't know and still don't know as much about them as we should, given their importance. We know a lot about high-end donors. We know a lot about major donor fundraising, those sorts of things. But the next generation donors were and still are in some ways a mystery, even despite how important they're going to be. So along with partners at 2164, which is a consulting practice based in New York City that works very much with and creates tools for the field, around next generation and multi-generational giving, and my program at the Johnson Center at Grand Valley. Over the last 5 years, we've done some intensive research on these next generation major donors, Gen Xers and Millennials, who are going to inherit the mantle of a family legacy of giving, or who are creating their own legacy through being earners of first generation wealth. And this is all going to be reported in the book that you see here, of course, coming out October 2nd. And what I'll present to you today is really the 4 different categories of major kind of messages and punchlines that come out of the work, and that you'll find in the book. So as we go through, you'll see each of those highlighted as the different sort of categories of the findings. What I'll say at this point is just to say that some of these show how they're going to be similar to previous donors. That's really what we're going to talk about when we talk about that first red box there. And then number 2 and 3 here are ways in which the next generation are going to be very different. And that's really where the nature of the revolution that we're talking about will be described. And then finally, we'll talk about the challenge that they face and how we can help them in helping create that philanthropic identity that they're going to use. So let's jump right into the findings and what we're going to see happen in this revolution. The first set of issues really revolve around the big questions for the next generation of donors, and that is the question of what they want to give to and why they want to give. And as we'll see, on both of those questions, the why they want to give and the what will they give to, their answers are not all that different from previous generations. There are some small differences and some important differences, but for the most part, they're more similar than different to previous generations of major donors. We start with the idea that the next generation of donors often has this media perception or common misperception that they're this sort of guy, that they're materialistic, they're entitled, they're wealthy rich kids who have really very little interest in getting involved in philanthropic activities or those activities that can make the world a better place. But what we in fact found was when we asked them the question of why they wanted to be involved, they answered that in very similar ways. And there were ways that were driven more by values than by the valuables that the previous perception might have suggested. They're not nearly as driven by materialistic, titled kind of things as some of the perceptions might be. So we asked them this question, why do you want to be involved in giving? What are the reasons to be involved? Their answers were supporting a cause that fits my values, fulfilling my duty as a person of privilege to give back to society, which is also a values-driven answer to the why question, and then making sure that I can do some good in the world and make a real difference, not just do it because that's what you have to do as a rich person. So these are all demonstrating the power and importance of values for this generation of major donors, and how significant that is. As we'll see, of course, that has implications for those of you who want to engage these next generation donors. Engaging them around values is a really powerful way to get them committed to your cause. They want to know about the mission and the cause and be committed to it. So I think this is good news. This is our first bit of good news. We also then asked, where do these values that they're interested in come from? And this was where they really pointed to what they learned from their parents and grandparents. Noticed how big those numbers are, saying the percentage of the people this is for a survey sample we did, percentage of people who say they're fundamentally influenced in their giving by their parents and grandparents. When we ask them that, as we'll see later, they not so influenced in the strategies that they want to use or how they want to do their giving, but when they say the reasons why they believe that being a donor, being a responsible donor is a good thing and a key part of their lives, they point directly to their parents and grandparents as the source of that. And that's, I think, significant for us to remember, because again, parents and grandparents are often your major donors now, and they are passing on those values to their children, which is, again, I believe, good news for us. Then we come to the question of what? What do they want to give to? And this is the one I think that many nonprofits are most interested in from this research with NextGen donors. Are the issues that they're going to be interested in the same issues as their parents and grandparents? Are they going to forget about education and healthcare and turn all their attention to in the environment and animals, for example? Are they no longer going to give to the arts or religion? And as I said before, the answer to this question is, on the whole, more similar than different from previous generations. They aren't, in fact, going to forget about education and basic needs. In fact, the top 2 issues for the next generation, when we asked them, were the same as what they said their family already gives to. Now, there are some differences in some of the causes. They're not major differences, but they're notable, ones that we want to pay somewhat more attention to. They are more interested in giving to civil rights and advocacy organizations. They are more interested in giving to environment and animals, in part because of the nature of the changes in the nonprofit sector and other things. And they're somewhat less interested in giving to religious organizations, which we think was really driven more by the decline in religious attendance participation overall. And then to arts organizations, health, youth and family, and especially these combination organizations, things like the United Way and Jewish federations and others. But what's interesting is that it's not as though the next generation is not interested in the arts, health, or giving to the things that the United Way gives to. It's more driven by the sorts of organizations that they tend to be solicited from or that they see dominating those areas. And so we see this next person's quote as an illustration of that. They said, I'd rather be involved in a small organization where I can make a big impact than a big organization where I make little impact. So it's not, they're still interested, for example, in giving to the arts or giving to healthcare, not quite as focused on it as their previous generations, but that's largely for them driven by the fact that they want to give, they don't like to give to organizations that are these big, massive organizations with big, massive campaigns in which they can't see the impact that they're going to have. They'd much rather find those places where they can see these small organizations get deeply involved. So if there's a healthcare organization that is a small organization that they can get really involved in, then they're all gung-ho about giving to healthcare and the arts, for example. So I think this is the subtlety of the finding, but overall, again, the punchline is they really are not going to abandon the causes that previous generations of donors have been supporting for many years. The other good news, I think, for many people, hopefully on this webinar, is that they are also still interested in local giving and local giving in communities that they're connected to. This is a challenge that a lot of people worry about with the next generation because of the news and information environment in which we live these days. It's much more likely or easy in some ways for a next generation person to know as much or more about hunger in South Sudan than they know about hunger in South Philadelphia or whatever their local community might be. And so the idea or the worry is, well, they'll just want to write checks and give online to organizations doing this work about those issues that they see around the world. But as we'll see, many of the findings about how they want to be engaged as donors point them to wanting to be deeply still engaged in local communities and being concerned with local communities. And frankly, for some of them that are involved with family foundations that have a local or regional orientation, even if that next generation person doesn't live in that local area, they still, for some reasons, have, for these reasons we'll mention later, have some interest and continued interest in giving to that local community, continuing the family legacy of local giving. So again, I think this is good news. So that was ways in which they're similar. Those were their answers to, as I said, the why they want to give and the what they want to give to questions. We move now to how they really see themselves as different. And this is where what we're calling in the book, the impact revolution, really comes out. And this really addresses not the why or the what question, but the how question. Where they are most different as next-gen donors is they want to change how major giving happens. And they want to change that in a couple of ways. The first is they want to see impact, and they are in some ways, we'd say, obsessed with impact. They want to see how their giving makes an impact, and they are willing to change whatever they need to change, experiment with whatever they need to experiment with in order to create that impact. So let's dig into that finding a little bit more. This is a quote from one of the people who's featured in the book. We have too many nonprofits that are well-intentioned. You've probably heard all this before, of course, those folks on this webinar, but the nonprofits don't look closely enough at these results. Good intentions aren't enough. We need to produce real results because those are needed. And this is such a great encapsulation of their obsession with impact. We cannot continue to do the same thing over and over again and expect better results. It won't happen. This is really what they mean when they say, I give primarily number one for impact, and I want to see impact. Now, they do define impact in different ways, and the one sort of common denominator that we found in how they think about impact comes down to the idea that they want to see it. That may be a spreadsheet, that may be a website video. For many of them, it's actually physically being on a site visit or present where the work is getting done. meeting the people who are the beneficiaries, meeting the people in the organizations doing the work. Here's an example of somebody saying they went to Africa and saw face-to-face what was going on, much more powerful for them, and much more likely for them to want to continue to give to that than talking about it abstractly in a Manhattan office. We heard that over and over and over again. The emphasis on face-to-face engagement, site visits, etc., which of course, I think for many of you probably suggests some implications and lessons that can come out of this work. So I mentioned that they're willing to change whatever they need to change, and they want to change strategy in order to create this impact. And what this graphic does is show you those sort of top 5 answers. We gave them a list of 25 possible ways in which pieces of elements of philanthropic strategy, and we said, how important are these to you, and which of these do you want to change? These were the most 5 important ones. And they really summarize, I think, the way that the next generation wants to change the how of major giving. They want to do more research. They want to know more about the organization, the issues that they're funding. In some ways, they want to have their own theory of change and then go out and find people who fit that theory of change, rather than sort of passively as a funder waiting for nonprofits and others to come to them with solutions or come to them with theories of change. They want to know what solutions they're passionate about and then go and find those people. They're focused on long-term impact through root causes, and they're very focused on measurements of effectiveness, metrics, etc. There's, they when we talk to them, they say they look at those measurements, they look at those outcomes, and they want more of them. This last one, number 5, too, is something we'll touch on briefly later, which is that they're very focused on peers and connecting with peers. And so I think the fact that that was number 5 in this big long list is itself a powerful finding. So they're willing to, these are the elements about how they want to focus on changing strategy. And when they say what they want to change about big giving, it's strategy. Strategy not for change's sake, not just to change it because they want to do something new, but because they believe that this is how you reach more impact. Advance the slide here. So the other thing that they want to do is take risks, and they want to, and they're also very excited about new innovations and experimentation that's going on in the field that may be more risky, but if that risk leads to more impact, if that innovative new way of doing things leads to greater impact, then they think it's their obligation to try it, and they're very excited about this. You can see this in this quote from one of the donors saying, there's a million different ways to be philanthropic than there were in the past. There's all these other triple bottom line, double bottom line businesses. There's social, there's microfinance, et cetera. They've talked a lot about impact investing, for example. There's some of the field, as you probably know, some of the biggest evangelists in the field for impact investing come from the next generation, and they're really pushing that within their own families. We feature, for example, Justin Rockefeller in the book, who's pushed very strongly within the Rockefeller Brothers Fund and other Rockefeller family funds to divest, for example, of fossil fuel investments, and believes that he can make as much change in the world or more change in the world through modifying his investments in socially responsible, values-aligned ways than he can ever do through grant making. So they're very passionate about these new ideas, new innovations, even if they're risky, that can lead to more impact. I put this very famous next generation, in some ways the epitome of next generation donors, up here to show the evolution toward a more next-gen style approach. For those who followed Mark Zuckerberg's giving career so far, this was the first big moment when he gave $100 million to the city of Newark public school system. And he basically just gave them $100 million, said, I trust you, the people running the system. On his right is Cory Booker there, who was the mayor of Newark at the time and now is a senator from New Jersey. He said, I like you. I think you have good ideas. Here's $100 million. Do what you want to fix the system. It didn't really work. And now many of you, of course, know where his giving has gone. They've created this, in some ways, incredibly new style approach to giving, a very next-gen style approach to giving. Mark Zuckerberg and his wife, Dr. Priscilla Chan, they created a massive charitable LLC that in some ways breaks the mold of the nonprofit for-profit boundary that we've lived with for many years about philanthropy. They're still making big grants. They're still giving big gifts, but they're also investing in socially responsible companies and political advocacy organizations and things like that. So it's a nice sort of example to show how the innovation in strategy and organizational form is really at the core of this style of next-gen giving that we saw among many people who don't have the billions that Mark Zuckerberg have, but certainly have the resources to be major donors in their own way. So we turn then to the other way in which they really want to change how big giving happens and what they're really passionate about in terms of how they want to improve philanthropy. And this really goes to, I think this may be the most important finding for this webinar, because this really goes to the question of how the next gen wants to be engaged with nonprofits and with their grantee partners. They want to develop a different kind of relationship with those organizations and causes that they support. They want that relationship to be much closer than they perceive the relationship has been for their parents and grandparents and previous generations of big donors. And they really want to be able to give more than just money. They don't want to just write checks. They feel they've got a lot of other assets to give, and their peers have a lot of assets to give, and they want organizations to ask them to and find ways for them to give not just treasure, but time, talent, and ties as well. So this is our traditional image of how you engage big donors in your campaign and in your fundraising, right? You set a fundraising goal, and then every time somebody gives money, you inch up that until you reach your goal. And the goal is a money goal, right? You're reaching the amount of money. Next gen donors really don't like this as a way of thinking about what role they could play with the organizations that they support. They don't like it for a few reasons, one of which is that it seems to be all about money, right? It's that the goal is just get money or get my friends to give money, not these other things that I have to give, my time, my talent, my expertise, my ideas. They also, by the way, don't like this because it suggests to them that the goal is just to raise money. The goal is not to have impact. And for them, it's all, again, about impact. So the goal at the top should not be a money goal. It should be an impact goal. Tell me what this money is going to do. And that when we've not achieved our goal when we raise the money, we've achieved our goal when we've had the impact that the money and other talents can bring. So let's dig in a little bit to what they had to say around how they want to change their relationship with nonprofits. They say, give us a clear call to action. Bring me in. Let's roll up our sleeves. Let's problem solve together. Tell me what you're working on and let's do it together. This other person said, this is really about the relationship that they want to have with nonprofits. I'm 100 mile wide, 100 miles deep. I want to have a close relationship. There's that language again. I want to know everybody in the organization. I want to really believe in them. I want to focus on them. And really make a big impact, there's that word again, on that organization. One of the things that they said was they don't like the traditional philanthropic approach that one of them called the peanut butter approach, where you've got this huge pot, and again, it's a historically huge pot of money that you've got to give. The idea that you would spread around a little bit of it around to everybody, for them is just bad philanthropy, especially if you're just spreading it around in terms of money, writing checks, and you're not doing anything else. They want to focus on those organizations that they know well, those causes and solutions that they believe in, and really give everything they have, not just their money, to that organization. Again, this is the sort of stereotype sometimes of next-gen giving, is that they want it to be easy, push button. What we found among these major donors who are becoming high-level donors right now is that they may donate to a charity through their phone, but they very much want to be hands-on. They want to be in there with the organization, developing that relationship. This is a really funny way the person put it, said, I'm happy to plan a party for young people. That's awesome. But hey, I've got all this experience. I'm much smarter than throwing you a party. I have much more to offer than that. I want to give my talent and my time. And they really want to be given not just time, but also talent and be taken seriously. They don't want to be just seen as an ATM. And in fact, they think that waiting until you retire and then just writing checks and writing checks a little bit here and a little bit there, that's the definition of bad philanthropy. And they would not be fulfilling their obligation to give well if they did that. So that really goes to the nature of the relationship. I know what many of you are probably thinking, which is, wow, that means that I'm going to have to spend a whole lot more of my money and my time, my organizational money and organizational time, being there face to face, engaging and finding ways for them to engage in meaningful ways with my organization. I got to invent new committees and new task forces and do these other things that make them feel fulfilled as donors, and that's going to take a lot of time and energy. They're going to be much more high maintenance as next generation donors. And frankly, the answer is, yeah, they're going to be more high maintenance in some ways. But one of them said very bluntly, I'm probably going to be this pain in the ass, but I'm going to give you more money. And I'm going to be more loyal, and I'm going to give it over the course of a long period of time. And I'm also going to give you more than just money in a way that could be very useful. But this one, of course, has dramatic implications for how to change our donor engagement strategies to engage them. I put this up here because we talked about the left side, but again, on the right side, notice that close friends and peers were the next two powerful influences on these donors, and this suggests another major finding which we had. It's probably not one that surprises you if you know these generations. They're very oriented towards their peers. They live in a very sort of horizontal network, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn kind of world, and they very much trust that information and that they get from their peers. They want to give with their peers when they can. They love peer giving circles, that kind of thing. And in some ways, they trust that information about an organization from their peers more than they trust, information that they can find from that organization, unless they've got a deep relationship with that organization. And so again, from an implication standpoint, finding ways to help them engage with other like-minded peers who are also wanting to give their time, talent, and treasures alongside them is a really important, significant implication and lesson that can come out from this research. So let me just advance here. We then come to the final, and this is a quicker one, about where they stand now in terms of developing themselves as donors, and then this will lead us into what you can do to help them along this journey that they're beginning. So the next gen, we asked them, what influences your development as a donor? And number one was their personal experiences as a donor. And you notice these other ones on this slide suggest that it's this engagement with organizations or observing how their parents and grandparents engage with organizations that really are powerful learning for them. And there's 2 significant points to make here. One is they are extremely proactive about wanting to learn to be a better donor. They know the historic importance that they're going to have. They're being told that by the media, but they're also being told that often inside their own families. So they know that they are going to have a major role to play as donors in our society, and they want to be good donors. At least those who are most active now as donors, the ones that we spend our time talking to, the ones who are the leaders of their cohort, they really proactively think about how can I become a better donor. And their answer to how I can become a better donor is the second point. That is, I want to have those experiences. Yes, I can read books and other things. And this pains me to say as an academic who writes books, but they, as much as they learn from books, they want to learn this experientially. Again, they want to develop those relationships that allow them to have hands-on, close engagements with problems, with beneficiaries, with their peers in ways that can help them then develop and learn into the donors that they want to be. When we think about how they want to work with the older generations, either within their own families or with others, say on a nonprofit board, when you bring on the next generation onto a nonprofit board alongside older donors and others who are your dominant board members now, the image that many of us have had is it's sort of a relay race. The next gen or the previous gen has taken us to this point, and now they're passing the baton to the next gen, and they're going to take it. That's what succession means in a foundation or on a nonprofit board. This is another thing. The next generation just really don't like this way of thinking about it. For them, it's not a relay race. It's a multi-generational, multi-skill team sport. Everybody's on the field together. It's not one baton being passed to another. It's you are on the field, and you as an older donor have experience and wisdom and ideas. I, as a younger donor, have something to bring as well. And those are I have energy. I have new ideas. I might know about some of these innovations that you didn't know about. And between the two of us on the field at the same time, we can do so much more together. I want to learn from you as an older donor, but I think I bring something to the team as well. They really want to be involved in these multi-generational teams. And I think that has implications not just for family foundations, but also for those who work with multiple generations on donor boards. So we come then to the sort of punchline of all this work, and especially around the issue of their learning and their identity, and that is right now these next-gen donors who are going to be the most significant philanthropists in history, they are right now going through this learning and developing process to become those donors that they're going to be for the rest of their lives. We know that's how development works. And so in their 20s and 30s, they're becoming the sort of donors that they're going to be. They're going to be the gold leaders of this golden age. And how are they becoming those donors? They're trying to find those experiences and engagements with nonprofits and others and peers that will allow them to learn to become that kind of donor and be a good leader of this golden age. And so the more that you all can find ways to help them in that journey to become those donors, the better off you will be, and the better off, frankly, all of us will be. So I want to end with some specific lessons, and I do know the slides will be shared, so you'll be able to take these home, but some specific lessons that come from many of these findings that I've just been describing for you. So one, of course, this may be the most significant one, which is they are eager to be given now, and if you and they are going to be your major donors in the future, even if they're not right now. But you need to be engaging them now, developing that relationship, embracing their eagerness, and it will be helpful for you in the future. We also say embrace that difference rather than resist it, even if it means more work. The generational difference can lead to some positive outcomes. I mentioned this one about engaging them around shared values. Talk to them about your mission. Don't think that you just need to give them materialistic benefits. They want to talk about values and mission. Maybe most significantly, they are the impact generation. Show them the impact. Don't just show them that line on the thermometer. Show them the work the impact and the outcomes that leads to. And I mentioned this one as well. If you're a big organization, don't fret. You do have a challenge, but you can just find ways of making your organization seem small, your global cause seem local. Give them a way to plug into the large organization. Make a small campaign out of a big campaign that they can help take charge of with their peers, for example. Be open to their new ideas. They want to innovate. They love innovation. Some of the innovations won't work, and they know they believe that if they develop a relationship and you tell them that the innovation isn't going to work, that they feel like that candid relationship, they'd back off. But you better believe that they're going to want to have that innovation. They're going to be excited if there's an experimental new idea that they come out about. And so I will say, one of the people that we talked to said the worst thing a nonprofit can tell me as a donor is when I tell them some new idea I have is, oh yeah, we'll take a look at that and we'll get back to you. She says it's the worst thing to hear because they never get back to you. What that means is no, we're not interested. We're just trying to appease you. So build other things, build and help them build those relationships. Help them, give them ways to not do more than just write checks to your organization. Find ways for them to plug in. Give them a task force to work on a real problem in your organization, and use their talents to do that. Be transparent. We know the next generation believes strongly in transparency. This may be uncomfortable at times, talking to them about problems of the organization, but they believe that's all part of developing a close relationship. Take them more seriously than an ATM or a bank account or a big last name in your community. Put their time and talents to use. Signal to them that you want them to give more than just their significant treasure. And then I think for nonprofits, this really means rethinking how you engage major donors. Let them roll up their sleeves. Give them opportunities to engage in the way that they want to engage. And then the final set of these, become a connector for them. The more value you can add for them to help them meet and learn and give with their peers, the better off they're going to think about your organization, and the more value you're going to be bringing to them. Be also a source of this learning that we're talking about. Help them develop those skills and have those experiences that they're so eager and desperate to have as they're going through this learning experience right now. And on your boards and other ways, help them facilitate these cross-generational conversations and learning and mentoring that they really want. Talk to your older generation donors and board members about how to bring on the next generation to their own family. And then finally, I reiterate with the idea of don't wait. You have to do a lot of this now in order to get to that place where they are both engaged and loyal with your organization and able to significantly commit those resources over many, many years that are going to come. Because as I said, they're going to give more money than any previous generations, and they're going to give it for more years. So it's time to start engaging them. So I end my piece and hand it back over, but I can't do that before I give another plug for the book coming out on October 2nd. It's of course available on Amazon and other places for pre-sale now. And if you have questions about that, or about bringing us in to do presentations on the book or other things, please just contact me through the email that you'll see at the end of the slideshow. I'm happy to do that. So I'm going to turn it now over to Diane to do the next part of the presentation. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Moody. We definitely appreciate all of your terrific insights. And as I've told you before, I especially very much appreciate your including us Gen Xers in the research, because it's our plight to feel forgotten. So we appreciate
That's
that
right.
very much.
Yep.
And also a lesson, I think, in there as well, because there's so much talk about the other generations next to us. So paying attention to those Gen Xers is good too. So I'm going to just spend a few minutes talking about how these insights and some others can be applied not only to engaging individuals directly, but how they relate to engaging corporate partners who are seeking to engage their employees through relationships with nonprofits or other social sector platforms. If we could actually go, I think we can skip that and go to the next slide. Great. According to the most recent Cone Communications CSR survey, 71% of millennials are hopeful that businesses will take the lead to drive social and environmental change going forward. While we think a lot about millennials as potential donors and consumers and communicators, of course, they're also employees, and actually there are more of them in the workforce than any other generation. If you'll go to the next slide. So our first key practice to leverage in your conversations with corporate prospects is to clearly and explicitly propose why your organization is equipped to help that corporate partner to engage employees, especially millennials and Gen Xers. Interpret what your organization can do in engaging these folks, all the things that Dr. Moody has talked about today. Interpret what your organization can do in engaging these employees as key business solutions for these companies. We miss something when we start or end our conversations or our proposals with listings of benefits, volunteer opportunities, tours, participation, etc. Instead, when we're talking to those corporate representatives, start and end with why. What it will do for the company to engage these employees, improving retention, helping to build teams or cross-generational lines of communication, meeting the ever-growing expectations of those employees for social engagement on the part of their employers, becoming an employer of choice, whatever will resonate with the particular company you're talking to about a philanthropic or marketing partnership. And to the greatest extent possible, communicate the ROI, the return on investment of working with you to accomplish those goals. You can do this through using stats about how important it is to millennials and Gen Xers to work for responsible and engaged companies, or you can use case studies or testimonials from other corporate partners to show what you can do in the areas of employee engagement and beyond. Going to the next piece, we have seen more organizations and articles questioning whether companies are still one of the best sources for specific kinds of board members, and how to best leverage those individuals who are not only serving as board members, but also representatives of their employer companies. A 2015 survey by Stanford GSB, Rock Center for Corporate Governance, BoardSource, and GuideStar found that 48% of board members do not believe that their fellow board members are very engaged in their work. Of course, that's a harsh statistic, and we could spend a lot of time unpacking what that means for the nonprofit organizations that those board members serve, or as the case may be, don't really serve. But for purposes of today, going to the next slide, we want to think about what these next-gen insights can do to help us improve that trend. For next-gen board members and junior board members who represent companies or serve as the company champion for your organization, we have an opportunity to gain more from both the individual and the company by actually raising the bar on them. So let's talk about the board members' goals for service, both in terms of serving your organization, as well as their goals related to their employer. Perhaps they want to engage their immediate team. Perhaps they want to demonstrate leadership skills or build a platform that will finally put them over the hump for their next promotion. This definitely applies to Gen X, of course, but especially for millennials, raising the bar and setting some significant goals together will often compel the volunteer to lead the charge toward achieving them. Those goals can be very motivating to next-gen folks, especially, as Dr. Moody said, if they have a hand in shaping how to accomplish those goals. And we find that these kinds of expectations, raising the bar on them, is actually key to getting them to punch above their weight, especially in terms of mobilizing others to give inside and outside their companies. And the success that they have will breed further success. So make sure you and your organization spend the time with these next-gen leaders to challenge them to meet higher goals. One of the worst things we can do is to make it easy for them or leave them alone to figure out how they can help. They will disengage if they do not see that their contribution is making a real difference. On to the next slide, our last stat here. When Points of Light conducted a study of trends in excellence in employee volunteering a few years back, they found that those companies with excellent employee volunteer programs were spending an average of $416 per volunteer. According to Forbes, that's significantly lower than the $1,200 that it costs per employee for an average training program. The pain and expense to companies of attracting and training employees is real and growing. So anything that can help them improve employee productivity and keep employees longer, even for 6 months or a year longer, is valuable to them. Next slide. Which is why they're looking to you to create elaborate custom employee volunteer days or ongoing employee engagement platforms. But in so many cases, while of course you appreciate their interests and their intentions, they're not adding so much impact through their time, and perhaps they're even costing you money. This is one of the most common topics I've talked about with nonprofit reps this year, when and how to charge companies for volunteer projects to make the value exchange make sense. So a few guidelines. Certainly the company should be paying at a minimum for any direct or indirect costs associated with their volunteer project. And they should be paying for the opportunity cost of what else you could have accomplished with the resources you're putting towards the volunteer project. But those just look at costs, and this goes well beyond that. We should be looking at the value you provide as a service provider for the company, whether their goals are team building, skill development, building loyalty, etc. They could hire a team building facilitator or take a class together or even do a ropes course. None of these are remotely free, and those entities don't charge just because they have direct costs, but because they are helping to engage employees and they charge for the value of that service. A service that, given where we are with next generation folks' expectations, is more valuable than ever. So we encourage nonprofits to use the insights we've heard about the next generation's desire to get involved and their expectation that their companies will facilitate at least some of that involvement to show the value that you can bring to companies who are looking to you to build them an employee engagement activity, and to see that they pay for the value that you're bringing. So that wraps up our presentation. So we're going to take some questions here with the 10 minutes that we have remaining. We'll get to as many as we can. Again, to type a question, simply click on the Q&A icon in the upper left-hand corner of your screen. That will open a window, and there you can type your question. And I know we have quite a few that have come in. So to start, question for you, Dr. Moody. You talked about how donors want to give more than money. Do you think that tying impact directly to funds or money is still a useful tactic? For example, give $100 and you will provide 40 meals to an undeveloped community. Do we still think that is motivating to tie funds to a number or a type of unit of impact?
Yeah, I think I think the first answer is, of course, that tying money to specific measures of impact is a definite improvement on what has traditionally been done in some cases, which is you tying money to a tier level of giving, right? Like if you give $1,000, you can be a platinum level donor, and you'll be listed in the platinum level part of the program. That's what's, I think, really the practice, the fundraising practice around sort of levels of giving that they would resist and that they find really unhelpful and not focused on impact. So I think the basic idea that you would say, okay, here's the specific outcomes and impact that a particular amount of money will give is in some ways a practice that I think they would embrace and continue. But I would also want to say that they don't want to just stop there. And they don't want to just say, okay, I read on your website that if I give $1,000, there's going to be books for, or school uniforms for, 50 girls in rural Rwanda that can go to school that couldn't have gone because they couldn't afford the uniform or something like that. They love that, and they may even like to see the faces of the girls that are helped and that kind of thing. But if there are ways, some of the ways that you can even improve upon that would be find ways in which they can say, give $1,000 plus come into our office and help us design, help us design this informational brochure for others using your PR expertise. That is really going to help those 50 girls more than just your $1,000 going to help them. Find ways that you tie not just a dollar amount, but a specific investment of time and talent to the impact. You'll find that that's even more powerful. I will also say that if you can tie it to show, instead of just saying that you're helping 50 girls, find a way for them to visit those girls. I know this isn't the case with especially with global organizations, although some organizations like Charity Water and others do that very well for major donors. Like take them to the community in which the water well that they paid for is actually being built. But find ways that they can have face-to-face engagements with either the beneficiaries of that, or if that doesn't always work out, the people who are doing the real work on the ground to make that impact happen. The person who is responsible for converting that $100 into the 40 meals for an undeveloped community. Let them talk to that person about why that connection works, and maybe even brainstorm about ways that you can help 80 people, provide 80 meals from that undeveloped community with the same amount of $100. That's what they would really love to do is in addition to giving $100, talk to the person about how they can leverage their $100 for 80 meals instead of 40.
Great, thank you. There are a few questions that relate to different, what are the best methods to reach out to next-gen donors? Should we throw events to introduce them to our organization? And if so, are there a certain kind of event that would be more useful? Are there other kinds of outreach that, when we're really thinking about how to bring them into the fold, are more likely to connect with those next-gen donors?
Yeah, I'll talk a little bit about how you reach them first, and then the more specific thing about events, and the two really relate to each other. So one thing that we found when we were talking to a lot of these next generation donors is that they may actually already be involved in your organization, and you may not even know that they are, or you may not know that you may know that they're involved and they're on a volunteer list, but you don't know that they're due to inherit a certain amount of money that could make them into a significant donor for your organization. We heard more than one donor tell us, I really like to volunteer, in some ways even anonymously if I can, or without letting on who that I have these resources to give. I like to volunteer for an organization first, because that really gives me a sense of the organization, sees whether I can connect to them, sees how they react to those volunteers and engage people, and lets me know if this is something I want to continue to build a relationship with before in some ways outing myself as somebody who could write a bigger check. And so it might be that you are already connected to them and you just don't know it. So I would say, part of that, of course, is prospect research, but part of it is also just, making sure that you are finding ways to develop relationships with those folks who are eager volunteers for your organization in a way that you can, start to find out what is their interest, what is the level at which they want to be engaged in your organization. And again, you may find that you have more sort of capacity in your existing donor base and volunteers. And they may be, many of them are giving, $25 or $100 to your organization for a few years before they write the $10,000, $20,000 check from their family foundation. So that's one thing, is that you may be already connected to them and reach out to them. Another thing is to recognize that many of them are can be reached and want to be reached through their older family members and or those staff folks who work with their family. So you've already got a relationship with a local family foundation. Know that family foundation staffer, who your program officer at the local family foundation, they maybe are facing the same challenge that you're facing, namely the idea that they want to engage, they want to know how to engage the next generation of their family, just like you want to know how better to engage the next generation of big donors. And so providing them, working with them, the staff person, in providing those opportunities for the next generation of their families, the trustees who are just coming onto the board, to have those experiences that we just heard that they really want to have, brainstorming with them about ways that you can beef up your site visits and your volunteer opportunities and other ways so that the next generation of that family can come and really be engaged in you as a grantee. That's going to serve their purpose as a staff member as it serves your purpose as a staff person of the nonprofit. So I would say that, use them as a resource, and also use the older generations on your board, your current board now, who are part of Giving Families, and because many of them are, when I go to these conferences and I talk to older folks, trustees and others in foundations, often the first thing they ask is, I'm really trying to get my grandkids involved and I just don't know how. And I really want my grandkids to be excited about the organizations that I'm excited about, the ones that I serve on the board on, but I don't know how to do that. And so if you can help them by providing those opportunities that their next gen really wants, and asking them to talking to them about their next gen, bringing their next gen in for a meeting, that is another way that you can sort of reach out to these next generation donors. And the final thing I'll say, which relates to the events question, is that often these events, they like a good party just as much as anyone, right? And so it's good to have parties, but they don't want to, just as we saw in that one quote, they don't want to be just brought in to run a party for other young people, or to be brought in and said, okay, here's where you get to plug in as a young person. Here's the junior board, and that's what you get to do. They begin to see that starts to smack a little bit to them of the kids' table. They want to be better to have an event in which you are asking them to really bring their mental, intellectual resources as well as their financial resources to bear on a new program or a new idea or a new task force in your organization, and giving them the power to help you organize that event rather than just say, here's what we have on offer for you. Bringing them, using their brain power and their talents to help you create a next gen donor event, and to do so in ways that isn't just about throwing a party, but that's about solving meaningful problems for the organization. Those are the events I think that really get them excited. Generally with events, I think any ways that you can give them an opportunity both to meet other peers who are like them that they may not know, and especially to be able to give and do real and meaningful work with those peers in some way. Those are the kind of groups and events that they really get excited about, using those peer networks to reach out to their peers, asking those who are your current donors now to help you recruit others for another event that you have. Those are some of the ways I think that these next gen events really work.
Great, thank you. So we're going to wrap up. If we weren't able to answer your question, there were a few that we weren't able to get to, or if you have any questions later, please feel free to contact us. Our contact information is on the screen. Today we've discussed how to engage the next generation of donors, and we really hope that you've picked up some ideas and tips that will be helpful to you. Certainly the Alford Group stands ready to assist you in your organization if you have further questions or problems you'd like to explore. As I mentioned at the beginning, this is, next slide. As I mentioned at the beginning, this is the first in a series of webinars. You can see here the topics and presenters for the next 3 webinars. All of this information and how to register is on our website at www.alford.com. Please keep an eye out for an email later today with the recording of today's presentation, the full slide deck, and a very short survey to tell us how we did. Thank you everyone for joining us. This concludes today's webinar. We will now disconnect.